Good evening. I'm Gotti Schwartz in Los Angeles. Let's go live now to Busan, South Korea, where President Trump is about to hold a formal meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. They've both arrived at Jimhae International Airport. You can see them shaking hands now. In a few moments, they're going to go inside the airport's visitor lounge for their meeting. The two leaders are expected to discuss moves on tariffs, fighting fentanyl, access to rare earth minerals. It comes amid the president's looming November 10th deadline to reach a tariff deal. Let's listen to what they're saying.
We'll have a great understanding. We have a great relationship. We've always had a great relationship. Which way? Thank you very much, everybody. Please.
Now we see the two leaders heading off to their bilateral meeting. Let's bring in NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, who is traveling with the president in South Korea. Gabe, we heard optimism from the president. He was describing their relationship as cordial. We've heard optimism leading up to this. What is the last thing he said was going to be discussed before this bilateral has now started?
Well, hey there, Gotti. Well, we actually just heard the president of the United States pay Xi Jinping probably the highest compliment he has, calling him a tough negotiator. That is something that we've heard from President Trump, from many world leaders. But as you said, this is a very highly anticipated meeting. The first time that both leaders have seen each other face to face in 6 years, and the first time they've met face to face since a trade war erupted between them. Now, the president for the last several days have been sounding very optimistic about this meeting. You just heard him right there saying briefly to reporters that he expected a very successful meeting, but on the table are some very thorny issues. Chief among them, the tariffs that the president had threatened 100% extra tariff a few days ago. He now seems to have backed off of that. But also, they will likely be discussing, as the president has repeatedly said, the issue of fentanyl coming into the United States, and President Trump blaming China for the large amounts of the potent drug that come into the U.S. Now, China has denied any involvement in that. It is precursor chemicals brought from China, though, that are used in Mexico to create the drug that then go into the United States. But President Trump, in the last few days aboard Air Force One, heading to Asia, that he has said that he does believe that China will come to some sort of an agreement to help the United States handle the issue of fentanyl. Now, separately from that, there was a lot of discussion heading into this meeting about the issue of Taiwan and, of course, the very thorny issue of Taiwan's independence. Now, yesterday, the president said that that topic was not likely to come up, although we just heard a reporter there in that handshake bring it up. Certainly, we have, from NBC News reporting, learned that multiple white administration aides were worried about what President Trump might say about Taiwan and whether he might shift the position of the United States, which at this point says that it does not support Taiwanese independence, but there is a question of whether he may shift that language to opposing Taiwan's independence, which would be seen as a victory to China. But again, President Trump downplaying any friction with China over that issue. So at this point, over the next hour or so, we are expecting this bilateral meeting with President Xi Jinping. President Trump actually, heading into this meeting, referred to it as a meeting of the G2. Essentially showing how important he thinks this meeting is in comparison to other world leaders. The president has repeatedly talked about his good relationship that he feels he has with President Xi Jinping. But Gotti, I should mention that the president posting on social media quite a significant social media post saying that the United States has more nuclear weapons than any other country. He goes on to say that Russia is second, China is a distant third, but will be even within 5 years. Because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed, he says, the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis, and that process will begin immediately. So there you go. The President of the United States saying that he's instructed his administration to begin testing nuclear weapons. We're out to White House officials to find out exactly what that means, whether he means testing the delivery systems for those nuclear weapons or the nukes themselves. The United States has not tested nuclear weapons since 1992. But again, that breaking news a short time before this meeting with President Xi President Trump saying that he wants his administration to once again begin testing nuclear weapons. But Gadi, as we await these live pictures of this bilateral meeting between President Xi and President Trump, again, we expect to hear whether both sides will be able to come to some sort of an agreement on tariffs. Again, the president saying he might be willing to back off the 100% tariff that he was threatening, but also lower a separate fentanyl-related tariff, which would be good news for world markets who, again, have been watching this meeting very closely, Gadi.
Gabe, it's so interesting that you bring up what we just saw happen in the hour leading up into this bilateral meeting, that talk of testing nuclear weapons in the United States or by the United States. And before that, we were all watching the news come down of the president announcing the possibility that South Korea would be allowed to pursue nuclear submarines. Right. All of that happening leading up to this meeting with Xi Jinping. Do you think that those things are going to be some topics that come up pretty quickly? Actually, it sounds like we've got a mic in the room right now, and let's take that live and listen to what they're saying.
And it's an honor to have you with us. Thank you very much. Thank you.
President Trump, it is a great pleasure for me as well to meet you. And it feels very warm seeing you again because it's been many years. Since your re-election, we have spoken on the phone 3 times, exchanged several letters, and stayed in close contact. Under our joint guidance, China-US relations have remained stable on the whole. Given our different national conditions, we do not always see eye to eye with each other, and it is normal for the 2 leading economies of the world to have frictions now and then. And in the face of winds, waves, and challenges, you and I, at the helm of China-US relations, should stay the right course and ensure the steady sailing forward of the giant ship of China-US relations. I always believe that China's development goes hand in hand with your vision to make America great again. Our 2 countries are fully able to help each other succeed and prosper together. Over the years, I have stated in public many times that China and the United States should be partners and friends. This is what history has taught us and what reality demands. A few days ago, in a latest round of consultation, our 2 economic and trade teams reached basic consensus on addressing our respective major concerns and made encouraging progress. This provided the necessary conditions for our meeting today. Mr. President, I am ready to continue working with you to build a solid foundation for China-US relations and create a sound atmosphere for the development of both countries. Mr. President, you care a lot about world peace, and you're very enthusiastic about settling various regional hotspot issues. I appreciate your great contribution to the recent conclusion of the Gaza ceasefire agreement. During your visit to Malaysia, you witnessed the signing of the Joint Declaration on Peace along the Cambodia-Thailand border, to which you had provided input. China has been helping in our own way Cambodia and Thailand properly settle their border disputes, and we have also been promoting peace talks to resolve other hotspot issues. The world today is confronted with many tough problems. China and the U.S. can jointly shoulder our responsibility as major countries and work together to accomplish more great and concrete things for the good of our 2 countries and the whole world. I look forward to exchanging views with you on questions important for our 2 countries and the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to have you all. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, why did you change your nuclear plans? Why are you going to be doing more nuclear testing?
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And Gabe, I'm sure you're listening to that. It picks up exactly where we left off, that first question to President Trump about the nuclear testing change for the United States, and that came in the hour before this bilateral meeting. Gabe, I know that question went unanswered by the president. He said thank you, and it looks like that bilateral meeting is now beginning without the cameras in there. But again, you've got him making a major announcement when it comes to the United States and nuclear testing, as well as the United States potentially allowing South Korea to build a nuclear submarine. How do you think that that is going to play into the dynamics of the talks that we see today?
Well, Gotti, a couple things. First of all, as part of our live coverage, actually before the camera cut to President Xi right there, President Trump had made some very brief opening remarks welcoming President Xi to this meeting, saying it was a great honor. I repeated calling him a good friend as well. But you're right, Gotti, very significant developments that the president did not answer a question from reporters right there. Also, I want to point out this meeting with President Xi, very different from the one several weeks ago with Russian President Vladimir Putin, the pomp and circumstance that we saw there at that Alaska summit. This is very bare bones, so to speak, at the Busan airport, which is not far from where I am and where the APEC summit is underway. But as you said, some significant developments when it comes to potential nuclear testing. Again, we don't have the details of that, but you're right. In the last few hours, President Trump announcing that he is allowing South Korea to build a nuclear submarine, at least parts of it, in the shipyards in Philadelphia, also announcing what he calls a trade deal with South Korea that involves some $350 billion in investment in the United States. Now, keep in mind, it had been several months ago, really over the summer, that there had been some informal framework that had been agreed to with South Korea. But the last several months has been a bit of a back and forth between the two countries trying to hash out the details of that. And that is something we've seen repeatedly from this administration, the president announcing some overarching trade deal, or at least a framework of a trade deal, and then it taking in some extra time, much more time in some respects, to be able to hash out those details. But the president, throughout this trip, and it has been a whirlwind trip, Gotti, through Malaysia, Japan, now South Korea, before the president heads home to Washington, he has prided himself in being able to strike deals. And also, you heard there in the opening remarks from President Xi, playing a bit to Donald Trump's ego, calling him a peacemaker, that he's very interested in peace. That's something that we have heard over and over again from the president as he has gone here country to country, something he's very proud of, that he has helped bring the end to several conflicts. Of course, some of those conflicts, it's unclear whether they're completely over with. And of course, there's that fragile ceasefire that we have seen in Gaza. But the president certainly wanting to make the case that he is a peacemaker, and the Chinese president picking up on that heading into this bilateral meeting. Unclear what the two parties will agree to, but certainly the world is watching, Gotti.
Yeah, I mean, Xi Jinping called President Trump a peacemaker, effectively, and was also talking about how he sees the United States and China as potential friends and partners in this ship of their relations. He also made mention of a possible framework of major concerns, at least some sort of a plan to address major concerns. We know that that agenda is very long and may have grown even longer with this talk of nuclear testing and nuclear submarines. But you've got reciprocal tariffs. You've got access to advanced chips. You've got the fentanyl issue. You've got Taiwan. Do you think that there's going to be enough time in this first bilateral meeting here within the next hour or 2 hours to get through this list of major concerns?
Well, look, the President Trump, he did tease that some of these issues have been discussed heading into this meeting. That the Chinese and American delegations had already discussed this beforehand. So it is Not clear yet what will indeed be agreed to, but there's certain things that we haven't even talked about, Gadi. There's also the issue of the TikTok deal being formalized, and the president suggested that might be on the way. Of course, the deal to keep TikTok active in the United States, the president had announced it weeks before, but we're told by the White House that he was expected to formalize it here during his meeting with President Xi. And also the issue of China buying soybeans from American farmers once again. China stopped doing that earlier this year, much to the chagrin of farmers in the United States who have depended on China to buy soybeans, and that farmers have said that that would be devastating to the American economy if China continues not to do so. So the president is suggesting that there might be some movement on that. Again, as you say, the president said that yesterday during a dinner with world leaders here where I am, that this meeting with President Xi was expected to last 3 or 4 hours potentially. Not clear, though, from today's schedule whether it will last that long, but that's something that we'll have to stay tuned and see what indeed is agreed upon and how long this bilateral meeting lasts, Scotty.
That we will. Gabe Gutierrez, stick with us here. I want to turn now to NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans. Christine, I'm sure you're watching this as well and wondering what is the first thing that they're going to be discussing in there. But if you can, remind us where the tariffs stand right now, because so many of us remember that brinkmanship, the tariffs going up to 100, then 140, then up and up and up almost every single day. And then there was the pause. And then that pause became even longer delay. So where are they right now, and what could we see coming out of this bilateral meeting?
So you have, Gotti, about 55% tariffs on the U.S. side on Chinese goods coming in here, and then China's retaliation is about 10%. And that kind of framework, that structure expires in the next couple of weeks. So they've got to come up with something either to keep those or to lower them. And so that is an important part of this whole discussion here. 2 weeks ago, Gotti, I sat there in the Treasury Department and listened to the Treasury Secretary who was sitting there next to the president, close to the president there. I listened to the Treasury Secretary actually just lambast the Chinese delegation for not holding up their end of the bargain in prior rounds of negotiations. So just in the past couple of weeks, you saw this relationship really sour. I think success tonight, in the morning there, would definitely be getting this relationship back on track. These two largest, the two biggest economies in the world. And there's some ways they can do that. We've seen that there may have be some cargoes of soybeans that have been bought by the Chinese. That's a gesture of goodwill. That could be seen as a success on the U.S. side. And if you get the Chinese to move forward some of these new export controls they want to put on these really important rare earth minerals, that could buy some more time for this relationship to improve a little bit, to maybe lower some of the heat on some of these tariffs and not put any new ones on. 2 weeks ago, the president said he was going to put 100% tariffs on top of China because he was so angry about Chinese plans to restrict exports of those rare earth minerals that are used, as you know, in everything from fighter jets to cars and all kinds of different important manufacturing in the United States. This relationship was rock bottom 2 weeks ago. It looks as though they think that they're going to have some deliverables to get back on track here today.
Yeah, it's hard to make anything as simple as a battery without the supply chain of China. Look, there is the easy wins that dominate headlines, and then there is the top of the list, what we really want here. What do you think is going to be top of the list for China, and what do you think is top of the list for the United States? Is it going to be Chinese access to advanced chips? Is it going to be these rare earth minerals? What are they going to wait till the end to try to negotiate and bring back?
Yeah, those rare earths, and I think the Chinese flexing its muscle on rare earths recently shows that each side is trying to really project power. And I also think that statement from the president about resuming testing of America's nuclear arsenal, that is also meant to show power. So you've got two world superpowers, each trying to show just how strong they are. I think some of the easier wins could be the Chinese putting more restrictions on the basic materials that you use, for fentanyl. The president is very, very serious about those chemicals not being allowed to come into the United States so easily. There could be some progress on that. But on the rare earths and on access to high-end U.S. chips, those are some of the thornier issues for sure.
I do want to ask also about what you think the markets are going to do tomorrow. I mean, we saw that zigzagging when the tariff war was in full effect and the one-upsmanship was happening. And then there was this 90-day pause that was delayed further and further and further. And things have kind of normalized when it comes to the markets. But given what we've seen so far, it seems as though they've both been pretty optimistic going in here. What could we see from the markets tomorrow?
The stock markets are at record highs, and they've had an incredible year. Even with all of this drama since so-called Liberation Day, remember back in April, and since April they're up 20 and 30%, depending on what average you're looking at. So they are priced for perfection. So they want to see, investors do want to see that this relationship is back on track, that we're not where we were 2 weeks ago with threats of 100% more tariffs and the potential for restrictions of important rare earths into the United States. I mean, that's really important that there be stability in this relationship. And then the market, continues on its path of least resistance, frankly, ebullient over all this AI spending for the moment. So price for perfection, which means if there's disappointment, that would be tough for investors.
Christine Romans, thank you so much, and we hope you stick around with us as well. Let's bring in NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, who is also out in South Korea, in Seoul, South Korea. Hey there, Garrett. I mean, I'm sure you were watching some of that bilateral, the part that we were allowed to watch, and now the actual negotiation starts there. But quite the lead-up. We had two announcements involving at least nuclear weapons and nuclear submarines. The president taking to social media to basically say that the United States will start testing nuclear arsenal again here in the United States potentially. And but just before that, South Korea may be allowed to pursue nuclear submarines. I know you've been covering this visit to South Korea. First off, I want to ask, how has that been received in South Korea, that news that they may be able to pursue a South Korean nuclear-powered submarine?
Well, I don't know that it's totally filtered down here yet this morning, Gotti, in South Korea, where folks are just waking up. But South Korean shipbuilding expertise was part of the reason that the president wanted to come to this region to try to kind of ramp up those relationships. It appears that South Korean submarine will be built at an American shipyard in Philadelphia by a South Korean company. It's that kind of sort of cross-pollination of expertise that the U.S. brings to this region that is something that China, frankly, doesn't have. The allies that we have that essentially surround China in Eastern Asia. And I think there's also perhaps, Gotti, a little bit of element of gamesmanship here by President Trump to introduce something like that South Korean submarine deal and these comments about nuclear testing. The White House has provided no additional information about what the president was referring to. Is he talking about the weapons themselves? Is he talking about the delivery systems? For more than an hour now since that initial post, I think about it almost like athletes trying to sort of psych each other out before a big game. The president really looks at all of these things as very personal elements of diplomacy, and that's why I bring that up. The way he thinks about this is the leader-to-leader engagement. He sees diplomacy as a one man looking another man, usually a man in his world, in the eye and trying to make the better deal. And he sees Chinese President Xi as a worthy adversary, as a worthy competitor. He talked about that, a tough deal maker, as Gabe pointed out, one of the highest compliments that President Trump could give. And so I do think there's a little bit of posturing, like perhaps two fighters at the weigh-in before a big fight, to use a combat sports metaphor, something that the president appreciates, that plays into the dynamic that we're seeing with the folks sitting down around the table. I'll just point out that despite all that posturing, the folks who are in the room with the president suggest to me this will still be an economic-focused discussion. He has his trade representative, his secretaries of commerce and treasury. Susie Wiles, notably the only woman in the room for either delegation, the chief of staff, his closest advisor, and of course Marco Rubio, Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, the dual-hatted role. But it's those officials, experts in trade and commerce that make me think that despite the posturing, that'll still be the focus, and I think the White House hopes the big takeaway when this meeting concludes.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to seeing what happened in that room. That's going to conclude our live coverage of President Trump's meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. We're going to have more ahead right here on NBC News Now, online at NBCnews.com, and a full wrap-up on today. I'm Gotti Schwartz. Good night, and thank you for watching.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.